The smell of smoke woke Elena Marsh before any sound did. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, and looked out her window. The sky above Blackthorn Forest glowed orange, a color that did not belong to any sunset. Thick gray clouds rolled upward into the night, lit from below by something burning fast and burning hard. She did not stop to think. She grabbed her boots, pulled a jacket over her nightclothes, and ran out the door before her mind had fully caught up with her body. Elena lived alone, in a small wooden house at the edge of the forest, close enough to hear owls at night, and far enough from town that most people forgot she existed. She worked at a veterinary clinic 3 miles down the road, tending to injured foxes, sick dogs, and the occasional deer that wandered too close to traffic. She had always felt something pulling her toward the trees, some quiet call she could never explain to anyone, not even to herself. Tonight, that pull became urgent. Tonight, it became a scream she could not ignore. She ran down the dirt path behind her house, the one she had walked 1,000 times, but tonight, the air was different. Ash drifted down like gray snow. Her lungs burned before she even reached the tree line. Somewhere deep in the woods, animals were crying out, a chorus of fear rising into the night sky. She did not know, could not have known, that less than a mile away, an entire world was falling apart. A world of wolves, hidden from human eyes for centuries, was burning. The Blackthorn pack had lived beneath these trees for generations, protected by old magic and older secrecy. Their territory stretched across the deepest part of the forest, where the canopy grew so thick that sunlight rarely touched the ground. Their leader was a wolf unlike any other, a man named Cale Ashbourne, known among his people as the Alpha King. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of storm clouds, and a presence that made even seasoned warriors lower their gaze. He had ruled the pack since his father's death, carrying the weight of hundreds of lives on his shoulders every single day. Tonight, that weight had become unbearable. The fire had started an hour earlier, sparked by a bolt of lightning during a dry summer storm. The forest had not seen rain in weeks, and the ground was littered with dead leaves and dry branches, perfect fuel for flames that spread faster than anyone could have predicted. By the time the pack's scouts noticed the smoke, the fire had already surrounded the northern denning grounds, the very place where the youngest pups slept. Cale had been standing at the ridge overlooking the valley when the first scream reached him. He turned instantly, his body already shifting into motion before his mind processed the sound. He ran through the trees, calling out orders, his voice carrying over the chaos like thunder. Wolves scattered in every direction, some carrying pups in their jaws, others forming lines to guide the elderly and the injured toward the river where the fire could not follow. But in the panic, something terrible happened. Something that would haunt the pack for years to come. Rook, the youngest son of Cale's sister, had wandered from his mother's side during the confusion. He was barely 3 months old, too young to understand danger, too small to outrun the flames on his short legs. When the wall of his family's den collapsed under the heat, he became trapped beneath broken wood and burning debris, his small body pinned in a space barely large enough to breathe. His cries were swallowed by the roar of the fire. No one heard him. No one, except for a girl running through the smoke a quarter-mile away, drawn by an instinct she did not understand. Elena reached the edge of the burning grounds just as the heat became unbearable. She should have turned back. Anyone with sense would have turned back. But she heard something beneath the crackle of flames, a small, desperate sound that cut through her fear like a blade. It was the sound of something young, something frightened, something dying. She followed it without hesitation. The smoke grew thicker with every step, stinging her eyes until tears streamed down her face. She pulled her jacket up over her nose and mouth, though it did little to help. Branches cracked and fell around her, some close enough that she felt the heat against her skin. Still, she pressed forward, following the sound of that small cry, praying she would find it before the fire found her first. She saw the collapsed den from 20 feet away, a mound of burning wood and earth, and beneath it, barely visible, 2 small eyes reflecting the orange light. A pup, a wolf pup, trapped and terrified, his fur singed at the edges, his small body trembling. Elena did not think about the fact that this was a wolf, not a dog. She did not think about the fact that wild animals could be dangerous, that fear could make even gentle creatures bite. She thought only of the small life in front of her, suffering and alone, and she moved toward him without a second thought. She dropped to her knees beside the wreckage, ignoring the way the heat scorched her skin through her jeans. She began pulling at the broken wood with her bare hands, tossing pieces aside as fast as she could, ignoring the splinters, ignoring the burns forming on her palms. The pup whimpered, pressing himself deeper into the small pocket of space that had kept him alive so far. "It's okay," she said, her voice shaking, but steady enough to be heard over the fire. "I've got you. I'm not going to leave you." She had no idea if the pup could understand her words, but something in her tone must have reached him, because he stopped struggling and let her work. Piece by piece, she cleared the debris, her hands bleeding now, her lungs screaming for clean air. Above her, a large branch groaned, ready to fall. She barely noticed. All she could see was the small creature in front of her, waiting to be saved. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she pulled the last piece of burning wood away and reached into the gap. Her fingers closed around soft fur, and she pulled the pup free, cradling him against her chest as she stumbled backward, away from the collapsing den. The branch above her fell a second later, crashing down exactly where she had been kneeling. Elena did not stop to process how close she had come to death. She turned and began running. The pup clutched tightly against her body, shielding him with her own frame as embers rained down around them. Her jacket, still pulled up over her face, caught small sparks that she swatted away without thinking. Her only goal was distance. Distance between the pup and the flames, distance between life and death. She ran until her legs gave out, until the smoke thinned enough that she could finally breathe without choking, until the roar of the fire became a distant hum instead of a deafening scream. She collapsed onto the forest floor, at the edge of a small clearing, her body trembling from exhaustion, her lungs raw and burning from the smoke she had inhaled. The pup squirmed in her arms, whimpering softly, but alive, completely, miraculously alive. Elena looked down at him, at his small face streaked with ash, his eyes wide and frightened, but no longer filled with the terror of the fire. She smiled weakly, even as her vision began to blur at the edges. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're safe." She did not know that her own body had already been pushed far beyond what it could safely endure. The smoke had done more damage than she realized, filling her lungs with poison, even as she fought to save a life that was not her own. She did not know that her heart, exhausted from the run and the heat and the sheer terror of the night, was beginning to struggle against a rhythm it could no longer maintain. She only knew that the small creature in her arms was breathing, and for now, that was enough. She tried to stand, tried to carry the pup further away from the danger, but her legs would not obey her. She sank back down, her back against a tree, the pup still held close against her chest. The world around her began to spin, colors blurring together, sounds fading into a distant murmur. She thought of her small house at the edge of the forest, of the life she had built there, quiet and simple and safe. She thought of the animals she had cared for at the clinic, of every creature she had ever tried to save. And she thought, strangely, that if this was how her story ended, she could accept it, because the small life in her arms was going to continue, and that felt like enough. Her eyes grew heavy. The pup, sensing something wrong, pressed himself closer to her, whimpering, nudging at her chin with his small nose, as if trying to wake her. Elena's eyes closed. And somewhere in the burning forest behind her, a powerful cry rose above the chaos, a sound that carried across the trees like a call to war. Cale Ashbourne had felt it the moment his nephew's fear spiked through the pack bond, and now, running faster than he had ever run in his life, he was following that same bond toward a clearing at the edge of the fire. He broke through the trees moments later, his massive form skidding to a stop at the sight before him. A human woman, burned and unconscious, lay slumped against a tree, and cradled against her chest, alive and breathing, was his sister's son. For a long moment, Cale could not move. He simply stared, his mind struggling to understand what he was seeing. A human had run into the fire. A human had saved his nephew, at the cost of her own strength, perhaps at the cost of her own life. The pup let out a soft whimper and looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes, as if begging him to help the one who had saved him. Cale's chest tightened with something he could not name. He moved forward slowly, kneeling beside Elena's still body, his sharp eyes taking in the burns on her hands, the soot covering her face, the shallow, unsteady rise and fall of her chest. She was dying, He could see it, could smell it, in the way her body was fighting a losing battle against smoke and exhaustion. And she had done this for a wolf she had never met. Cale reached out, gently lifting his nephew away from her arms, checking him quickly for injuries, before setting him down beside a nearby root, safe and steady. Then he turned back to Elena, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her fading face. He did not know her name. He did not know anything about her, but he knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he could not let her die in this clearing, forgotten and alone. He lifted her into his arms, careful of her burns, and began running back toward the heart of the pack's territory, toward the only place that might be able to save her life. Behind them, the fire continued to burn, but ahead of them, something new was beginning, something neither of them could have predicted on an ordinary night that had turned into anything but ordinary. The forest, for now, kept its secrets, but it would not keep them for long. Cale ran faster than he had ever run before, cutting through the trees with a desperation that startled even the wolves he passed along the way. Word spread through the pack bond instantly, wordless and urgent. The Alpha King was carrying a human. The Alpha King was carrying a dying stranger toward the healer's den. Whispers followed him through the smoke-filled night, but he paid them no attention. His focus remained fixed on the woman in his arms, on the shallow breaths that seemed to grow weaker with every passing second, on the burns across her palms that told a story of sacrifice he still did not fully understand. He reached the healer's den just as the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, gray and uncertain, much like the fate of the woman he carried. The healer, an older wolf named Dara, stepped out to meet him, her eyes widening at the sight before her. She did not ask questions. She simply gestured for Cale to bring the woman inside, already reaching for the herbs and remedies that might mean the difference between life and death. As Cale laid Elena down on the soft moss bedding inside the den, he found himself unable to look away from her face. Even unconscious, even covered in soot and pain, there was something about her that held his attention, something that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition, though he had never seen her before in his life. "Will she live?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Dara did not answer immediately. She was already working, her hands moving with practiced precision as she examined the extent of the damage. Finally, without looking up, she spoke. "I do not know," she said honestly, "but I will do everything I can." Cale nodded once, then stepped back, allowing the healer the space she needed to work. He moved to the entrance of the den, glancing back at the fire still glowing in the distance, then down at the small pup now curled against his leg, safe and alive, because of the woman fighting for her own life, just a few feet away. He did not know her name. He did not know where she had come from, or why she had run into a burning forest for a creature she had never met. But he knew, standing there in the gray light of dawn, that his life had just changed in ways he could not yet understand. And somewhere behind him, in the quiet dark of the healer's den, Elena Marsh continued to breathe, each breath a small, fragile victory against the night that had almost taken everything from her. The story, it seemed, was only just beginning. 3 days passed before Elena opened her eyes again, and when she finally did, nothing around her made sense. She was lying on a bed of soft moss and folded cloth, inside a space that smelled of dried herbs and pine smoke. The walls around her were made of packed earth and stone, curved in a way that felt more like a cave than a room. Sunlight filtered in through a narrow opening above her, casting a pale golden line across the floor. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but the sharp ache in her lungs and the raw, stinging pain across her palms told her this was very real. She tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness forced her back down. A soft voice spoke from somewhere nearby, calm and steady. "Slowly," the voice said. "Your body has been through a great deal. Give yourself time." Elena turned her head and saw an older woman kneeling beside her, her silver hair tied back, her eyes a pale amber color that seemed almost too bright to be entirely human. The woman held a small wooden bowl filled with a thick green paste, and she began applying it gently to the burns on Elena's hands. "Where am I?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar to her own ears. "Somewhere safe," the woman replied. "My name is Dara. I have been caring for you since you were brought here." "Brought here by who?" Dara did not answer right away. Instead, she finished applying the paste, wrapped Elena's hands in soft cloth, and sat back on her heels, studying her patient with quiet curiosity. "You ran into a fire to save a pup that was not your own," Dara said instead of answering the question directly. "Do you remember that?" The memory rushed back all at once. The smoke, the heat, the small trembling body she had pulled from the wreckage. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "The pup," she said quickly, trying to sit up again despite the dizziness. "Is he alive? Is he okay?" "He is safe," Dara said, gently pressing a hand against Elena's shoulder to keep her still. "Thanks to you. He is young and strong, and he will recover fully." Relief washed over Elena so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She had not been sure, in those final moments before losing consciousness, that her efforts had been enough. Hearing that the pup had survived felt like a weight lifting from her chest. "Good," she whispered. "That's good." Dara studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful in her expression. "Most people would not have run into those flames," she said quietly. "Most people would have run away." Elena shook her head slowly. "I heard him crying. I couldn't just leave him there." "Even though you did not know him? Even though he was not your own kind?" The question struck Elena as strange, though she could not quite place why. She glanced around the space again, taking in details she had missed before. The structure of the room did not match any human dwelling she had ever seen. The bowls and tools scattered nearby were made of stone and bone, crafted with a skill that felt ancient. And Dara herself, despite her gentle manner, carried something in her posture that reminded Elena, oddly, of the wild animals she cared for at the clinic. Alert and watchful, in a way most people were not. "Where exactly am I?" Elena asked again, more firmly this time. Before Dara could respond, the sound of footsteps approached from outside the den, heavy and deliberate. A moment later, a tall figure ducked through the entrance, and Elena's breath caught in her throat for an entirely different reason. The man who entered was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway, his presence so commanding that the air in the small den seemed to shift around him. His eyes, a striking shade of gray, fixed on her immediately, sharp and searching, as though he were trying to read something written beneath her skin. "You're awake," he said simply, his voice deep and steady. Elena found herself unable to look away from him, though she could not explain why. There was something about him that felt overwhelming, not frightening exactly, but powerful, in a way she had never encountered before. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. "My name is Kale," he said. "You saved someone who matters a great deal to me. I owe you a debt I do not know how to repay." "The pup," Elena said, understanding dawning slowly. "He's yours?" "He is my nephew," Kale corrected gently. "But in every way that matters, yes, he is mine to protect. And I failed to protect him that night. You did not fail." Elena shook her head, still trying to piece together the strange puzzle of her surroundings. "I don't understand what's happening here. Where am I? Why does this place look like this? Why do you and Dara seem so—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence without sounding foolish. Kale exchanged a glance with Dara, something passing between them that Elena could not interpret. Finally, he stepped further into the den, lowering himself to sit near her bedside, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "What I am about to tell you will be difficult to believe," he said, "but I think you deserve the truth, especially after what you have done for us." Elena's heart began to pound, though she was not entirely sure why. Something in his tone told her that her life was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated. "The pup you saved," Kale continued slowly, "was not simply a wild animal caught in a fire. He is part of a pack, a community that has lived hidden in these woods for generations, a community of wolves who are not entirely what they appear to be." Elena stared at him, waiting for the explanation to make sense, waiting for some logical piece to click into place. It did not come. "I don't understand," she said again, quieter this time. Kale held her gaze steadily. "We are not ordinary wolves, Elena. We are shifters. Wolves who can take the form of men and women, who have lived alongside humans for centuries without being seen. This forest, the one behind your home, has been our territory for longer than your town has existed." For a long moment, Elena simply stared at him, waiting for laughter, waiting for some sign that this was an elaborate joke. But his expression remained completely serious, his eyes steady and sincere. "That's not possible," she said finally, though her voice lacked conviction, even to her own ears. "I understand your disbelief," Kale said gently. "But you have already seen proof, even if you did not recognize it. The pup you pulled from the fire, when Dara examined him, was not simply a wolf. When frightened enough, our young sometimes shift without meaning to. You held him in his wolf form. But the fire, the panic, the pain, it caused something else to happen as well." Dara stepped forward then, her expression gentle but serious. "When you brought him to safety, dear, his fear overwhelmed him so completely that he shifted twice in your arms, from wolf to boy, and back again. You were unconscious by then, and did not see it happen. But it happened." Elena's mind reeled, trying to process information that felt impossible, that defied everything she understood about the world. And yet, some part of her, some quiet instinct she had, carried her entire life, the same instinct that had pulled her toward this forest again and again, seemed to accept the truth without resistance. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Couldn't you have just let me believe I saved an ordinary wolf pup?" Kale's expression shifted, something more vulnerable crossing his sharp features. "Because what you did was extraordinary, and you deserve to understand the full weight of it. You risked your life for a stranger, not knowing what he truly was, asking for nothing in return. That kind of sacrifice deserves honesty, not secrecy." Elena absorbed his words slowly, feeling the truth of them settle into her chest. Whatever strange world she had stumbled into, whatever impossible reality now surrounded her, one thing remained clear. She did not regret her choice that night. She would make the same choice again, without hesitation. "What happens now?" she asked, looking between Kale and Dara. "Now," Kale said, "you rest and heal, and when you are ready, if you wish it, I will answer any questions you have. You have earned that much, and far more." Elena nodded slowly, exhaustion beginning to pull at her again despite the questions still swirling in her mind. As her eyes grew heavy once more, she felt Kale's gaze remain fixed on her, steady and unwavering, as though he could not quite bring himself to look away. She did not know it yet, but for Kale, something had shifted the moment he found her in that clearing, something far deeper than simple gratitude. A pull he could not explain, a recognition that defied logic, had settled into his chest and refused to leave. As Elena drifted back into sleep, Kale remained beside her, watching over the woman who had run into fire for a stranger, wondering what strange thread of fate had brought her into his world, and wondering, with a quiet unease he had never felt before, what it might mean for both of them. Over the following week, Elena's strength slowly returned, though the burns on her hands would leave faint marks that would remain with her for the rest of her life. She spent her days resting in Dara's den, learning piece by piece about the world she had unknowingly stumbled into. The Blackthorn Pack, she learned, was one of the oldest wolf communities in the region, tracing its roots back hundreds of years. They lived by strict laws, hidden deep within the forest, careful never to reveal their true nature to the human world beyond the trees. Their territory stretched for miles, protected by scouts who patrolled day and night, watching for threats both human and otherwise. Kale visited her often, sometimes to check on her recovery, sometimes simply to sit with her in silence. Elena found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit, drawn to his quiet strength, the careful way he listened when she spoke, the flicker of warmth that occasionally broke through his otherwise serious expression. One afternoon, as golden light filtered through the trees outside the den, Kale arrived carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. He knelt beside her bedding and carefully unwrapped it, revealing the small pup she had saved, now sleeping peacefully, his fur no longer singed, his small body whole and healthy once more. "He wanted to see you," Kale said, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Or rather, I suspect his mother wanted to see the woman who saved her son, but sent him ahead as an excuse." Elena reached out carefully, running her fingers gently through the pup's soft fur. He stirred slightly at her touch, opening his eyes and letting out a small, contented sound, before drifting back to sleep against her side. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "His name is Rook," Kale said, watching the exchange with an expression Elena could not quite read. "He is my sister's only child, Losing him would have broken something in this pack that could never have been repaired. "I'm glad I could help," Elena said simply. Cale studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Most people," he said slowly, "would have run from that fire without a second thought. You ran toward it. Why?" Elena considered the question carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer rather than a simple one. "I've spent my whole life caring for animals," she said finally, "working at the clinic, helping creatures that can't help themselves. When I heard him crying, I didn't think about the danger. I just thought about the fact that something small and helpless needed someone to fight for it. I couldn't turn away from that, even if I wanted to." "That is a rare quality," Cale said quietly. "Rarer than you know." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps approaching the den entrance. A young woman with warm brown hair and sharp, alert eyes stepped inside, offering a quick bow of respect toward Cale, before turning her attention to Elena. "My name is Ivy," she said, offering a small, genuine smile. "I wanted to thank you myself. Rook is my son." Elena's heart softened immediately at the sight of the woman, at the raw gratitude visible in her expression. "He's a wonderful little boy," Elena said. "I'm so glad he's safe." Ivy's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she knelt beside the sleeping pup, gently stroking his fur. "I don't know how to repay what you did," she said softly. "You gave everything, nearly your own life, for a child you had never met. I will never forget it. My entire family will never forget it." Elena felt a lump form in her throat at the sincerity in Ivy's voice. "You don't need to repay anything," she said. "I would do it again, without hesitation." The three of them sat together for a while, Ivy sharing small stories about Rook, about his mischievous nature, his love of chasing butterflies through the meadow near their home. Elena found herself laughing for the first time since waking in this strange new world, the tension in her chest easing slightly as she allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment. As the afternoon wore on, Ivy eventually gathered Rook and excused herself, leaving Elena and Cale alone once more in the quiet den. The silence between them felt different now, warmer somehow, filled with an understanding that had not existed before. "You have a way of putting people at ease," Cale observed. "Even after everything you have seen, everything that must feel impossible to you, you carry yourself with a strange sort of calm." "I've always been that way," Elena admitted. "Even as a child, my parents used to say I was more comfortable around animals than people. There's something honest about them. They don't pretend to be something they're not." Cale's expression shifted slightly, something thoughtful crossing his features. "And what of us? Now that you know the truth of what we are, do you see us differently?" Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "I see you as people who happen to carry something extraordinary within them," she said. "But underneath that, I still see kindness. I still see a mother who loves her son, and an uncle who would do anything to protect him. That doesn't change just because I know the rest." Something in Cale's expression softened at her words, a warmth entering his gray eyes that had not been there before. "You continue to surprise me," he said quietly. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," he said, his voice low. "It is not a bad thing at all." As the days passed, Elena's recovery continued, and with it, her bond with the pack grew stronger. She learned the names of those who visited her, exchanged quiet conversations with warriors and healers alike, and found herself growing increasingly reluctant to imagine leaving this hidden world behind. One evening, as she sat outside Dara's den watching the sun sink below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Cale approached and settled beside her without a word. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I have spoken with the pack elders," Cale said eventually, breaking the quiet. "They wish to hold a gathering in your honor, once you are fully recovered, a way of formally thanking you for what you did." Elena turned to look at him, surprised. "That's not necessary." "Perhaps not," Cale agreed. "But it is deserved. What you did that night was an act of extraordinary courage, the kind of courage that deserves to be remembered, not quietly forgotten." Elena felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest, though she could not tell if it came from the honor being offered, or from the way Cale's eyes lingered on her face as he spoke. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll be honored to attend." They sat together as the last light faded completely, the forest around them settling into the quiet sounds of night, crickets singing, leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Neither of them spoke again, but the silence felt full, comfortable, filled with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Elena did not know, sitting there beneath the darkening sky, that the fire which had brought her into this world was only the beginning of the challenges she would face. Nor did she know that the connection forming between herself and the powerful Alpha beside her was destined to become something far greater than either of them could yet imagine. But for now, in that quiet moment beneath the stars, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt as though she had finally found a place where she truly belonged. Not everyone in the pack shared Cale's warmth toward the human woman recovering in their territory. Word of Elena's presence spread quickly through Blackthorn, and while most greeted the news with curiosity and gratitude, a smaller faction viewed her arrival with deep suspicion. Chief among them was a broad-shouldered warrior named Garrick, a longtime rival of Cale's, who had never fully accepted his leadership after their father's passing years earlier. Garrick found Cale standing near the training grounds one morning, watching a group of young warriors practice their combat forms. He approached without invitation, his expression tight with disapproval. "You allow a human to walk freely through our territory," Garrick said without preamble. "You share our secrets with her as though she were pack." Cale did not turn to look at him immediately, his gray eyes remaining fixed on the training below. "She saved my nephew's life at the cost of her own safety," he said evenly. "That earns more than suspicion, Garrick." "It earns gratitude," Garrick countered. "Not trust. Humans have hunted our kind for centuries. One act of kindness does not erase that history." Cale finally turned, his expression hardening slightly. "She is not the humans of old, Garrick. She did not know what Rook was when she ran into that fire. She saved him, because she could not bear to see something helpless suffer. That tells me more about her character than any history could." Garrick's jaw tightened, but he did not press the argument further, though the tension in his posture made it clear the matter was far from settled in his mind. "Be careful, Alpha," he said instead, his voice lower now, more measured. "The heart can cloud judgment in ways the mind cannot always correct." He turned and walked away, before Cale could respond, leaving the Alpha King standing alone with his thoughts, Garrick's warning settling uncomfortably in his chest, despite his outward confidence. Elena, unaware of the tension building within certain corners of the pack, spent her mornings slowly regaining her strength, walking short distances through the forest, with Dara's careful supervision. The burns on her hands had begun to heal into thin silver scars, a permanent reminder of the night that had changed her life forever. During one such walk, she found herself near the training grounds, drawn by the sound of movement and the sharp clash of practice weapons. She paused at the edge of the clearing, watching as a group of young wolves sparred under the watchful eye of an older instructor. "You should not be walking this far alone," a voice said from behind her. Elena turned to find Cale approaching, concern evident in his expression, despite the firm set of his jaw. "I wasn't alone for long," she said, offering a small smile. "I just wanted to see more of this place. It's beautiful here." Cale's expression softened slightly as he came to stand beside her, watching the training below alongside her. "This forest has been my home my entire life," he said. "I sometimes forget how it might appear to someone seeing it for the first time." "It feels alive," Elena said thoughtfully, "like the trees themselves are watching over everything that happens here." "Perhaps they are," Cale replied. "Our ancestors believed the forest itself carried a form of spirit, one that protected those who respected its boundaries, and punished those who did not." Elena glanced up at him, curious. "Do you believe that?" Cale considered the question seriously before answering. "I believe there are forces in this world we do not fully understand, and I believe that some things happen not by chance, but by design, even when we cannot see the pattern clearly until much later." Something in his tone made Elena's heart skip slightly, though she could not quite name the feeling settling in her chest. Before she could respond, a commotion near the training grounds drew both their attention. One of the younger warriors, a boy no older than 16, had taken a hard hit during his sparring match, stumbling backward and landing awkwardly on his arm. He cried out in pain, clutching his wrist, as his instructor rushed to his side. Without thinking, Elena moved forward, years of veterinary training kicking in instinctively. She knelt beside the injured boy, gently taking his arm despite his initial flinch of surprise. "It's all right," she said calmly. "Let me look. I might be able to help." The instructor glanced uncertainly toward Cale, who gave a small nod of permission. Elena carefully examined the boy's wrist, feeling for any signs of a break, noting the swelling already beginning to form. "It's not broken," she said after a moment, relief evident in her voice. "But it's a bad sprain. You'll need to keep it still for a few days, and ice will help with the swelling." The boy nodded, wincing slightly, as Elena helped stabilize his arm with a strip of cloth from her own sleeve, creating a makeshift support until proper care could be administered. Throughout the exchange, she spoke to him gently, distracting him from the pain with soft, reassuring words, much the way she would with any frightened animal brought into her clinic. When she finally stood, brushing dirt from her knees, she found several pairs of eyes watching her with newfound curiosity, the young warriors and their instructor, clearly impressed by her calm competence under pressure. "You have skill," the instructor said, offering her a respectful nod. "Where did you learn such things?" "I work at a veterinary clinic," Elena explained. "Different patients, but the same principles apply. Calm hands and a calm voice go a long way toward easing pain." Cale watched the exchange with quiet pride swelling in his chest, though he said nothing, simply observing, as Elena continued to interact easily with the young warriors, answering their curious questions about her work, with genuine patience and warmth. Later that evening, as the sun began to set once more, Cale found Elena sitting near the edge of the river that ran through the heart of the pack's territory, her bandaged hands resting in her lap as she watched the water flow past. "You have a gift," he said, settling beside her. "The way you cared for that boy today, the way you cared for Rook that night, it is a rare thing, that kind of instinct." "I've always felt more useful helping others than doing much of anything else," Elena admitted. "It's strange. Back home, I never quite felt like I fit anywhere. But here, even surrounded by all this strangeness, I feel like I have a purpose." "You do fit here," Cale said, his voice quiet but certain. "More than you realize." Elena turned to look at him, searching his gray eyes for the meaning behind his words. Before either of them could say more, a sharp howl echoed through the trees, distant but urgent, a sound that made Cale immediately rise to his feet, every muscle in his body tensing. "Stay here," he said quickly. "That is a warning call." Elena's heart began to race as Cale moved swiftly toward the source of the sound, disappearing into the trees within seconds, leaving her alone beside the river, with an uneasy feeling settling deep in her stomach. Whatever peace she had begun to find in this hidden world, it seemed, was about to be tested once again. Elena waited by the river for what felt like hours, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes, her mind racing through every possible danger that could have prompted such an urgent call. She thought of returning to Dara's den, but something kept her rooted in place, an instinct telling her to stay close, to be ready if she was needed. When Cale finally returned, his expression was grim, his usually composed features tight with barely contained anger. "What happened?" Elena asked, rising quickly to meet him. "Hunters," Cale said, the word sharp and bitter on his tongue. "Human hunters, tracking near the eastern border of our territory. They found the burned section of forest and grew curious about what caused it. My scouts spotted them setting up equipment, cameras, traps." Elena's stomach dropped. "Do they know about you? About the pack?" "Not yet," Cale said. "But if they continue searching, if they find any sign of what we truly are, it could put everyone here in grave danger. Humans have hunted our kind before, Elena. Not all of them share your compassion." The weight of his words settled heavily over her. She understood, suddenly and completely, the delicate balance the pack maintained every single day, the constant vigilance required to protect not just their territory, but their very existence. "What will you do?" she asked. "Increase patrols along the border. Ensure no trace of our world reaches human eyes." Cale's jaw tightened. It has happened before, centuries ago. An entire pack in the Northern Territories was discovered and hunted to near extinction. We do not forget lessons like that. Elena felt a chill run through her despite the warm evening air. "I had no idea the danger was so real." "It is a danger we have always lived with," Cale said, softening slightly as he looked at her. But it is not one you need to carry the weight of. You have already given more than enough. Over the following days, the pack's mood shifted noticeably. Patrols increased, warriors moved with sharpened focus, and an undercurrent of tension ran through every conversation Elena overheard. She found herself wanting to help in whatever way she could, though she was uncertain what use a human woman with bandaged hands could possibly be to a pack preparing for potential conflict. The answer came a few days later, when one of the younger scouts returned from patrol with a deep gash along his leg, having encountered one of the hunter's traps hidden cleverly beneath a layer of leaves. He was brought quickly to Dara's den, his face pale from blood loss, his companions anxious as they carried him inside. Elena moved instinctively, years of clinic experience taking over as she assessed the wound alongside Dara. The gash was deep, requiring careful cleaning and stitching to prevent infection. And though Dara's herbal remedies were effective for many ailments, this particular injury called for more precise, methodical care. "I can help," Elena said firmly, already reaching for the supplies Dara kept for such emergencies. "I've done this exact kind of work before, just on different patients." Dara hesitated only a moment before nodding, recognizing the confidence and skill in Elena's steady hands. Together, they worked to clean and close the wound, Elena's calm voice a steady anchor for the frightened young scout throughout the painful process. When the work was finally finished, and the scout lay resting comfortably, exhaustion pulling him toward sleep, Dara turned to Elena with newfound respect in her amber eyes. "You have saved another life today," she said quietly. "Twice now. This pack owes you a debt it cannot easily repay." "I don't need repayment," Elena said, wiping her hands clean. "I just want to help, in whatever way I can." News of her actions spread quickly through the pack, and the suspicion that had lingered among some members began to shift, replaced gradually by genuine respect and gratitude. Even Garrick, upon hearing of her steady work in saving the young scout, found himself reluctantly reconsidering his earlier judgment, though he remained careful not to voice this shift too openly. Kale, watching from the entrance of the den, as Elena tended to the injured warrior with such focused determination, felt something in his chest tighten with an emotion far deeper than simple admiration. He had led this pack for years, had watched countless warriors fight and bleed and heal, but never before had he felt such a powerful pull toward another person, human or wolf. That evening, as the forest settled into the quiet hum of night, Kale found Elena sitting alone outside Dara's den, staring up at the stars scattered across the clear sky. "You continue to prove yourself invaluable to this pack," he said, settling beside her. "I just did what needed to be done," Elena replied, though a small smile tugged at her lips at his words. "The same as I would for anyone who needed help." "That is precisely what makes you remarkable," Kale said. "You do not weigh the cost before offering your help. You simply give it, freely and completely." Elena turned to look at him, something warm and uncertain fluttering in her chest, at the intensity in his gray eyes. "I could say the same about you," she said softly. "The way you protect this pack, the weight you carry for everyone here, it's a heavy burden." "It is a burden I willingly carry," Kale said, "though I admit it has felt lighter these past days, somehow, since your arrival." The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither of them quite dared to name. Elena felt her heart racing, uncertain what to say, uncertain how to navigate the strange, powerful connection building steadily between them despite the impossible circumstances that had brought them together. Before either of them could speak further, a sudden shout rang out from the direction of the eastern border, followed by the sound of multiple wolves howling in alarm. Kale was on his feet instantly, every trace of softness vanishing from his expression, replaced by the sharp, commanding focus of a leader responding to danger. "Stay here," he said again, though this time his voice carried a note of genuine fear, an emotion Elena had not yet witnessed from him. "Kale, what's happening?" she asked, rising to follow him despite his instruction. "The hunters," he said grimly, already moving toward the trees. "They have crossed into our territory." Elena's blood ran cold as she watched him disappear into the darkness, the weight of his earlier warnings settling over her with terrifying clarity. Whatever fragile peace had existed within the pack these past days was about to be shattered, and she could only wait, helpless and afraid, to learn what price that shattering might demand. Elena did not stay behind. She told herself she was simply following at a safe distance, wanting to understand what was happening. But the truth was simpler than that. She could not sit quietly in the dark, waiting, while people she had come to care for faced danger without her. She followed the sound of raised voices and shifting bodies through the trees, moving as carefully and quietly as she could manage. By the time she reached the eastern border, the scene before her was chaos. Two men stood near a cluster of trees, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the darkness in erratic beams. Around them, several wolves circled at a careful distance, low growls rumbling from their throats, caught between the instinct to attack and the discipline to hold back, waiting for their alpha's command. Cale stood at the center of the confrontation, though not in his wolf form. He remained as a man, tall and imposing, his hands raised in a gesture of calm, as he spoke to the hunters in a measured, steady tone. "You are trespassing on private land," Cale said, his voice carrying an authority that made even the armed men hesitate. "I suggest you leave quietly, before this becomes a situation none of us want." One of the hunters, a heavy-set man with a scruffy beard, laughed nervously, though his rifle remained raised. "We saw wolves out here. Big ones. Not natural. We're just trying to figure out what's going on." "There is nothing unusual here," Cale said. "Simply wild animals protecting their territory, much as you would protect your own home from intruders." The tension in the clearing was suffocating, thick enough that Elena could feel it pressing against her chest, even from a distance. She watched, heart pounding, as the standoff continued, neither side willing to back down completely. Then, disaster struck. A young wolf, barely more than a pup himself, darted forward from the tree line, startled by a sudden noise, directly into the hunter's line of sight. The second hunter, younger and more nervous than his companion, reacted on pure instinct, swinging his rifle toward the movement and firing before anyone could stop him. The shot cracked through the night air, and for one horrifying moment, Elena thought the young wolf had been struck. But Cale had moved faster than thought should allow, throwing himself between the bullet's path and the frightened pup, taking the impact meant for someone else. He staggered, but did not fall, blood beginning to seep through his shirt at the shoulder, his expression darkening with pain and barely restrained fury. The wolves around him surged forward instinctively, ready to defend their fallen leader, and for a moment, it seemed as though violence would erupt beyond anyone's control. "Stop!" Elena's voice rang out before she could stop herself, breaking from the tree line and rushing into the clearing, without a single thought for her own safety. Every eye turned toward her, hunters and wolves alike, stunned by the sudden appearance of a human woman running directly into the heart of the confrontation. "Please," she said, breathless, positioning herself between the hunters and the wolves, her hands raised in a plea for calm. "No one else needs to get hurt tonight. Please, just lower your weapons." The hunters stared at her in confusion, clearly unprepared for this development. "Who are you?" the bearded man demanded. "What are you doing out here?" "I live nearby," Elena said quickly, thinking on her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. "These are just wild wolves, protecting their den. You've frightened them, and now everyone's scared and reacting badly. Please, just leave. No one wants anyone getting hurt." The younger hunter, still shaken by his own reaction, lowered his rifle slightly, uncertainty crossing his face. "The big one," he said, gesturing toward Cale, still standing despite his injury. "It moved like nothing I've ever seen." "Wolves are fast when they're protecting their young," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. "You saw a startled pup and a protective pack. That's all this is." The tension slowly began to ease, the hunters exchanging uncertain glances, clearly rattled by the strange encounter, and eager now to leave, rather than risk further confrontation. After a long, tense moment, the bearded man finally nodded, gesturing for his companion to lower his weapon completely. "Fine," he muttered. "We're leaving. This place gives me a bad feeling anyway." The two men retreated quickly into the darkness, their flashlight beams bouncing erratically as they hurried away from the territory. Elena did not relax until the sound of their footsteps had faded completely into the distance, silence finally settling back over the forest. Only then did she turn to Cale, her relief shifting instantly to alarm at the sight of blood soaking through his shirt, his face pale despite his attempts to remain standing tall. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to his side. "It is a minor wound," Cale said, though the tightness in his voice betrayed the pain he was clearly suppressing. "I will heal quickly." "You took a bullet for that pup," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving raw fear in its place. "Let me look at it. Please." Cale allowed her to guide him toward a fallen log, sitting heavily as she carefully examined the wound at his shoulder. The bullet had grazed him, rather than lodging deep within the muscle, a fortunate outcome given the circumstances, though the wound still bled steadily and would require careful attention. "You should not have come out here," Cale said quietly as she worked, tearing a strip of cloth to press firmly against the injury. "It was dangerous. You could have been hurt." "So could you," Elena countered, refusing to back down despite the exhaustion evident in her voice. "I couldn't just stay away while people I care about were in danger." Cale's gray eyes fixed on her face, something profound shifting in his expression at her words. "People you care about," he repeated softly. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly as she realized what she had said, though she did not take the words back. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken meaning, the two of them sitting together in the aftermath of danger, closer now than they had ever been before. Around them, the surrounding wolves began to relax, several shifting back into their human forms, exchanging relieved whispers about the near disaster that had just been narrowly avoided. As Elena finished securing the makeshift bandage against Cale's shoulder, she realized her own hands were trembling, the delayed shock of the confrontation finally catching up to her. Cale noticed immediately, reaching out to steady her hands within his own despite his injury. "You are safe," he said gently. "It is over now." "I know," Elena whispered, though her voice still shook. I was so afraid something terrible was going to happen." "You prevented that terrible thing from happening," Cale said, his voice low and filled with quiet admiration. "Once again, your courage saved lives tonight." Elena looked up at him, the space between them feeling suddenly very small, the weight of everything they had survived together, pulling them closer, in ways that felt both natural and terrifying. Neither of them moved away, and for a long moment, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting. But the moment was interrupted by Dara's urgent voice, calling from the trees, drawing them both back to the pressing reality of Cale's injury and the need for proper care. As they made their way back toward the healer's den, side by side, something unspoken had shifted between them, a connection deepened by shared danger and mutual sacrifice that neither of them could deny any longer. Neither of them yet realized that the danger from the hunters, though avoided that night, had left behind a far more dangerous threat, one that would soon put Elena's own life on the line once again, in ways far more devastating than either of them could have predicted. The hunters had left more than fear behind them. 2 days after the confrontation at the eastern border, one of the pack's scouts discovered a hidden trap buried beneath a layer of leaves near the same clearing, a cruel metal device laced with a poison strong enough to bring down a full-grown wolf. The hunters had clearly anticipated retaliation, or perhaps simply wished to leave a parting threat behind before abandoning their search of the territory. Cale ordered the area cleared immediately, warriors combing every inch of the eastern border for similar devices. 3 more traps were found and safely disabled over the following day, but the discovery left the entire pack on edge, the fragile sense of safety they had begun to rebuild shattered once again. Elena, eager to help in any way she could despite Cale's gentle protests that she had already done more than enough, insisted on joining Dara as she gathered herbs used for treating poison exposure, in case any pack member fell victim to the hidden dangers scattered through the forest. It was during one such gathering trip, deep in a section of woods Elena had not yet explored, that tragedy struck. She was reaching for a cluster of pale purple flowers Dara had described as useful for drawing poison from a wound, her attention fully focused on the delicate task, when her foot caught against something hidden beneath the undergrowth. A sharp, searing pain shot through her ankle as unseen metal teeth closed around her leg, and she cried out, collapsing instantly to the ground. A trap, one the scouts had missed. Elena's vision blurred with pain as she looked down at her leg, horror flooding through her at the sight of the device embedded in her flesh, dark liquid already seeping from the wound, where the poisoned metal had broken skin. She tried to call for help, but her voice came out weak, swallowed by the vast quiet of the forest around her. Dara, several yards ahead, turned at the sound of her cry and rushed back immediately, her amber eyes widening in alarm at the sight before her. She worked quickly, carefully freeing Elena's leg from the trap's cruel grip, but the damage had already been done. The poison, designed to weaken and eventually kill a powerful predator, had entered Elena's bloodstream, and her much smaller human body stood little chance against its effects. "Stay with me," Dara said urgently, pressing her hands against the wound in an attempt to slow the poison's spread. "Elena, stay awake." But Elena's vision was already darkening at the edges, her limbs growing heavy, her breath coming in shallow, labored gasps. The last thing she registered before consciousness slipped away entirely was Dara's frantic voice calling out for help, echoing through the trees. Word reached Kale within minutes, carried swiftly through the pack bond by warriors who had heard Dara's urgent cries. He abandoned whatever task had occupied him instantly, running faster than he had ever run before, fear driving him forward with a desperation that bordered on madness. He found them in a small clearing, Dara kneeling over Elena's still form, her hands stained dark with blood and poison as she worked frantically to slow the toxin's spread. Elena's face had gone pale, her lips tinged faintly blue, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. "How bad?" Kale demanded, dropping to his knees beside them, his voice raw with barely controlled panic. "Bad," Dara admitted grimly. "This poison was meant to kill creatures 3 times her size. Her body is fighting a battle it was never designed to win." Kale's chest tightened with a fear unlike anything he had ever experienced, sharper and more consuming than any danger he had faced on the battlefield. He gathered Elena carefully into his arms, following Dara back toward the healer's den at a desperate pace, her limp form feeling impossibly fragile against him. Once inside the den, Dara worked with fierce determination, applying every remedy she knew, drawing on knowledge passed down through generations of healers before her. She forced diluted herbal mixtures past Elena's lips, applied poultices to the wound, and monitored her weakening pulse, with growing desperation, as the hours stretched on. Kale remained at Elena's side throughout the long night, refusing every suggestion that he rest, his gray eyes fixed unwaveringly on her pale face, watching for any sign of change, any flicker of hope amid the terrifying uncertainty. "She cannot die," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the den. "She has given everything to this pack. She cannot die because of it." Dara glanced up at him, something knowing in her expression despite the exhaustion evident on her own face. "You care for her deeply," she observed quietly. Kale did not deny it. "I do not fully understand it myself," he admitted. "But from the moment I found her in that clearing, something within me recognized her as something precious, something I could not bear to lose." "That recognition is not without meaning," Dara said carefully. "There are old legends, Kale, stories of bonds that form between wolves and humans under circumstances such as these. Bonds that transcend simple gratitude or affection." Kale's attention sharpened at her words, though his focus remained primarily on Elena's still form, on the shallow rise and fall of her chest that seemed to grow fainter with each passing hour. "What legends?" he asked. But before Dara could elaborate, a sudden change in Elena's condition drew both their attention. Her body began to tremble violently, her breath catching in a way that sent ice through Kale's veins. "Dara," he said urgently. "What's happening?" "The poison is reaching her heart," Dara said, her voice tight with fear, as she worked even more frantically, mixing a new combination of herbs with shaking hands. "I need more time. I need to slow this." Kale took Elena's hand in his own, her skin cold and clammy against his palm, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the powerful Alpha King felt utterly, terrifyingly helpless. "Please," he whispered, leaning close, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Please, fight this. Do not leave. Not now. Not like this." Elena's eyelids fluttered faintly at the sound of his voice, though she did not wake, her body still locked in its desperate battle against the poison coursing through her veins. Kale remained there, holding her hand, refusing to let go, as Dara continued her frantic work through the darkest hours of the night, the fate of the woman who had saved so many still hanging precariously in the balance. Just before dawn, something strange began to happen. Dara, exhausted but still working, suddenly paused, her eyes fixing on Elena's wrist with sharp, startled attention. A faint silver mark had begun to appear beneath her skin, delicate lines forming a pattern unlike anything Dara had seen in decades, glowing softly even in the dim light of the den. "Kale," she said, her voice filled with quiet astonishment. "Look." Kale turned, following her gaze, and felt his breath catch at the sight of the mark spreading gently across Elena's wrist, silver light, pulsing faintly in rhythm with her weakening heartbeat. "What is that?" he asked, though something deep within him had already begun to suspect an answer he could hardly believe. Dara's hands trembled slightly as she reached out, carefully tracing the edge of the mark, without touching Elena's skin directly. "I have only ever read of this in the oldest texts of our people," she said, her voice hushed with reverence. "The mark of a fated guardian." Kale's heart pounded, memories of childhood stories, half forgotten, beginning to surface in his mind. "The old legends," he said slowly. "Tell me." Dara straightened, her expression grave, and filled with wonder in equal measure. "Long ago, our ancestors believed that certain human souls carried a rare and powerful destiny, souls bound by fate to protect a specific bloodline of shifters, chosen not by choice, but by something older and deeper than either wolf or human understanding. These souls were said to be drawn toward their bonded bloodline instinctively, feeling a pull they could never fully explain, even before ever meeting them." Kale's mind raced back to every strange, inexplicable pull he had felt toward Elena since the moment he found her in that burning clearing, every instinct that had told him she was meant to be protected, meant to be kept close. He thought of her own words, describing the strange draw she had always felt toward this very forest, long before she ever knew what secrets it held. "She has always felt pulled toward these woods," he said slowly, understanding beginning to take shape within him, "even before she knew any of us existed." "That is no coincidence," Dara said. "The legends say a fated guardian is born with an instinct toward their destined bloodline, an instinct that grows stronger the closer they come to fulfilling their purpose. Her choice to run into that fire, to save Rook without a single moment's hesitation, that was not merely an act of individual courage, Kale. That was fate revealing itself." Kale looked down at Elena's still form, at the silver mark now glowing more brightly against her pale skin, and felt something shift powerfully within his chest, a certainty settling over him that defied simple explanation. "What does this mean for her now?" he asked urgently. "Does this mark offer any hope against the poison?" Dara's expression grew more serious, the wonder in her eyes tempering into careful calculation. "The bond of a fated guardian is said to be strengthened through a specific rite, one that has not been performed in generations. It allows the bonded alpha to share a portion of his own life force with his guardian, strengthening her body enough to fight off what would otherwise kill her." Kale's gray eyes snapped up to meet Dara's, understanding and resolve crystallizing instantly within him. "Then we perform this rite. Now." "Kale," Dara said carefully, "this ritual has consequences you must understand fully before proceeding. It is not simple healing. It is a binding, one that will tie your fate to hers permanently, in ways that cannot be undone. Your own strength will be diminished for a time, as your body works to restore what it has given. And more than that, once performed, your lives become intertwined forever, in ways neither of you can fully predict." Kale did not hesitate, not even for a moment. "I do not care about the cost to myself," he said firmly. "I will not watch her die when there is a way to save her. Whatever consequences follow, I will face them without regret." Dara studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any trace of doubt, finding none. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Then we must act quickly. The poison is already reaching too deep. We do not have much time left." As Dara began preparing the ancient rite, gathering rare herbs and reciting words in a language Elena had never heard, words passed down through countless generations of pack healers, Kale remained at Elena's side, his hand still wrapped tightly around hers. "Do you hear me, Elena?" he whispered, leaning close once more. "I am not going to let you go. Whatever this bond asks of me, I will give it, gladly, if it means you continue to live." Outside the den, the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, gray light slowly giving way to soft gold, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting to see whether this night of fire and poison and impossible fate would end in loss, or in something far greater than either Cale or Elena could yet imagine. Dara finished her preparations and looked up at Cale, her expression solemn. "Are you certain?" she asked one final time. Cale's answer came without hesitation, his voice steady, despite the fear still coursing through him. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." And with that, the ancient rite began, the fate of two souls, human and wolf, about to become forever intertwined beneath the rising light of a new dawn. Dara guided Cale through the ritual with careful precision, her voice low and steady despite the gravity of what they were about to attempt. She instructed him to press his palm firmly against the silver mark on Elena's wrist, aligning it with a matching mark that slowly began to form on his own skin. Called forth by the ancient words she continued to recite. "You must offer your strength willingly," Dara explained. "Speak the binding words from your heart, not merely your memory. The rite will know the difference." Cale nodded, his gray eyes never leaving Elena's pale face, as he positioned his hand against hers, the silver marks on both their wrists beginning to glow more brightly at the contact, pulsing in unison, like two hearts finally finding the same rhythm. "I, Cale Ashbourne, offer my strength to you, Elena Marsh," he said, his voice steady and clear despite the emotion thick in his throat. "I offer my life, freely and without condition, that yours may continue. Whatever price this bond demands of me, I accept it, gladly, if it means you live." The silver light between their joined hands flared suddenly, brilliant and warm, spreading up both their arms in delicate, branching patterns. Cale felt a powerful pull deep within his chest, as though something vital were being drawn out of him and passed directly into Elena's failing body. The sensation was neither painful nor pleasant, simply overwhelming, a profound awareness of his own life force flowing toward her, strengthening her, even as it left him weakened. Dara watched with wide, careful eyes, as Elena's color slowly began to return, the faint blue tinge fading from her lips, her breathing deepening and steadying beneath the glowing light of the ancient bond. The poison that had threatened to claim her life seemed to retreat before the surge of new strength flooding through her veins, unable to withstand the combined force of ancient magic and Cale's unwavering will. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, the light between them slowly beginning to dim as the ritual reached its natural conclusion. When it finally faded completely, Cale sagged slightly, exhaustion washing over him with sudden, overwhelming force, though a quiet, desperate hope had taken root in his chest. "Elena," he whispered, watching her face intently. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her eyelids fluttered, and a soft, shaky breath escaped her lips, deeper and steadier than any breath she had taken since the poison first entered her body. "She is stabilizing," Dara said, relief flooding her voice as she checked Elena's pulse, finding it stronger now, steadier, fighting back against the last remnants of the poison with newfound vigor. "The bond has done its work. She will live." Cale closed his eyes briefly, a wave of relief so powerful it nearly brought him to tears washing over him. He remained at Elena's side, his own strength considerably diminished from the ritual, but his focus remained entirely on her continued recovery, refusing to rest until he was certain she was truly safe. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the pack once morning fully arrived, and the reaction was varied. Some elders spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the return of an ancient legend long thought lost to history. Others, including Garrick, struggled to reconcile their earlier suspicions with the undeniable truth that their Alpha King had just bound his own life force to a human woman through one of the oldest and most sacred rites their people possessed. Garrick found Cale later that day, sitting exhausted but resolute beside Elena's still sleeping form, and for once, his expression carried no trace of his earlier hostility, only a grudging, complicated respect. "You gave a piece of yourself to save her," Garrick said quietly, more statement than question. "I did," Cale confirmed, his voice tired but certain. "And I would do it again, without hesitation." Garrick studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. "The legends say, a fated guardian bond is never formed by accident," he said finally. "Perhaps I was wrong to doubt her place among us." Cale nodded slowly, too exhausted for triumph, though the acknowledgement settled something uneasy that had lingered between them for days. She has proven herself many times over, Garrick. Not through words, but through action. Again and again. Garrick offered a small, respectful bow before departing, leaving Cale once more alone with Elena, watching over her recovery through the quiet hours of the afternoon. As the sun began its slow descent toward evening, painting the sky once again in soft shades of orange and gold, Elena's eyes finally opened fully, clear and alert for the first time since the poison had taken hold. "Cale?" she whispered, her voice weak but steady. Relief flooded through him so completely that he could not speak for a moment, simply reaching out to gently cup her face in his hand, his gray eyes bright with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I am here," he said softly. "You are safe. You are going to be all right." Elena's gaze searched his face, taking in the exhaustion evident in his features, the faint silver mark still visible on his wrist, matching the one now permanently etched into her own skin. Slowly, understanding began to dawn in her eyes.
"What happened?"
she asked.
"What did you do?"
Cale took a deep breath, preparing to explain the profound, irreversible bond now connecting their two lives together, uncertain how she would receive news that would change everything between them forever, but certain, without any doubt, that he did not regret a single moment of the choice he had made to save her. Cale explained everything slowly, carefully, choosing his words with the same gentle patience he had shown her from the very beginning. He told her of the mark that had appeared on her wrist during the poison's darkest hour, of the ancient legend Dara had uncovered, of the rite he had performed without a single moment of hesitation to save her life. Elena listened in quiet astonishment, her fingers tracing the delicate silver pattern now etched permanently into her own skin, still faintly warm to the touch. "A fated guardian," she repeated softly, testing the unfamiliar words. "That's what I am?" "That is what the legends call it," Cale said. "But to me, you have always been simply Elena, remarkable, courageous, kind beyond measure. The mark only confirms what I believe I already sensed the moment I found you in that clearing. And this bond," Elena said carefully, "it connects us now, permanently." "It does," Cale confirmed, watching her expression closely, searching for any sign of fear or regret. "I understand if that frightens you. It is not a small thing, what has happened between us. But know this, Elena, I do not regret the choice I made. I would give a piece of myself again, 1,000 times over, if it meant keeping you safe." Elena's eyes filled with tears, though they were not tears of fear or regret, but something warmer, something that had been building quietly within her chest since the very first moment she had woken in this strange, extraordinary world. "I'm not frightened," she said softly. "I think, somehow, some part of me has been waiting my whole life to find this place, to find you." Cale's breath caught at her words, his gray eyes searching hers with quiet, hopeful intensity. "Then, you do not resent what has happened? The bond, the mark, everything that now ties your fate to mine?" "No," Elena said, reaching out to take his hand in hers, the silver marks on both their wrists pulsing softly at the contact, warm and comforting, rather than overwhelming. "I ran into that fire without knowing what waited on the other side. I would make that same choice again, every single time, even knowing everything that would follow." Over the following weeks, Elena's strength returned fully, the last effects of both the smoke and the poison fading completely from her body, leaving behind only the faint silver scars on her hands and the permanent mark on her wrist as quiet reminders of everything she had survived. She moved freely now through the Pack's territory, welcomed warmly by nearly everyone she encountered, her place among them no longer questioned or doubted. Rook grew stronger and more playful with each passing day, often found trailing after Elena during her walks through the forest, his small form bounding happily alongside her, as though he sensed, in whatever simple way a young pup could understand, the depth of the sacrifice she had made for him. Ivy became a close and trusted friend, the two women spending long afternoons together, sharing stories and laughter that filled the quiet spaces of Elena's new life with warmth she had never quite experienced before, even among her own kind, back in the human world she had left behind. And Cale, the powerful Alpha King who had once ruled his pack with careful, guarded authority, found himself transformed, in quiet, profound ways, by the bond now connecting him to Elena. He laughed more easily, spoke more openly, and carried the weight of his responsibilities with a lightness that had been missing from his life for longer than he could remember. One evening, as the sun set once more over the forest, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Cale found Elena standing at the edge of the same clearing where he had first discovered her dying, the memory of that terrible night still vivid in both their minds, though it no longer carried the same weight of fear it once had. "Do you ever think about that night?" Elena asked quietly as he approached, her eyes fixed on the peaceful clearing before them, so different now from the burning chaos she remembered. "Every day," Cale admitted, coming to stand beside her. "It was the night I nearly lost you before I ever truly had the chance to know you, and yet, it was also the night that brought you into my life, into this pack, into a place where you belong completely." Elena turned to look at him, a soft smile touching her lips. "I used to feel like I never quite fit anywhere," she said, "like I was always searching for something I couldn't name. But standing here now, with you, with this pack, I finally understand what that searching was leading me toward." Cale reached out, gently taking her hand in his, the silver marks on their wrists glowing faintly in the fading evening light. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, "whatever challenges this world brings to our door, I promise you this, Elena, you will never face fire alone again. Not while I still draw breath." Elena's heart swelled with an emotion too large for simple words, and instead of speaking, she simply stepped closer, resting her head against his shoulder, as they watched the last light of the sun disappear beneath the tree line, giving way to a sky full of quiet, steady stars. The forest around them settled into peaceful silence, no longer filled with the roar of flames or the desperate cries of a frightened pup, but with something far gentler, something that felt, at long last, like home. Elena Marsh had run into fire with nothing but courage and an instinct she could not explain, and in doing so, had found not only a life she had saved, but a life she had never known she was searching for. And Cale Ashbourne, the Alpha King who had discovered her dying in a burning clearing, had found in her not simply a debt to repay, but a bond that would carry them both forward, together, into whatever future awaited beneath the ancient trees of Blackthorn Forest.